You know that the spyware is really bad when even the United States' federal spy agency is warning people about it. So, there's been these announcements coming out first from the FBI and then the NSA, and all the rest of the alphabet people have signed off on the warning about vulnerable routers being exploited by state-sponsored hacking groups. Now, in the past, I've talked about how routers are one of the most exploitable devices in the household because of how poorly they're typically administered. Most people don't ever bother to update their routers or even log into them other than the first time that they set up their Wi-Fi networks. And honestly, I'm convinced that a lot of people don't even really bother to do that. Like I remember when a new ISP came to town, and they were going door to door selling the service to people, and a lot of people signed up for it because they were cheaper and faster than the competitors. A little while after, I was walking around, and you can see the different SIDs in the neighborhood when you walk by with a smartphone. I noticed that most people still had the default network names and probably the same passwords their routers came with. And just like any other device, there's vulnerabilities that get discovered in the router software and firmware over time. And those vulnerabilities can be exploited if they go unpatched, as they often do. For example, if you have a TP-Link router that hasn't been updated in over a year, you might be vulnerable to this attack against the local web administration panel. This is the web page that comes up whenever you type in your router's local IP address into your browser, and it's the place where you would perform those administrative tasks. This vulnerability in particular is in the HTTPD service that listens on port 80 by default. A hacker can send a specially crafted GET request which allows them to bypass authentication and read the router's internal password file. After successful exploitation, the hacker is essentially your network administrator now. Luckily, this vulnerability is not remotely exploitable in most cases, unless you have the remote console option enabled. The remote console option is what allows you to administer your router from a remote location. Typically, you only see it in office routers, and it's not turned on by default in most home consumer routers. So, in those cases where the remote console isn't enabled, the hackers need to first attack the router over the LAN, which they would most likely do by first compromising a device already on your network, like a phone or a laptop. But keep in mind that it's not just your devices that you have to worry about. You might have ironclad OPSEC, but anyone else who has a compromised device that you've given your Wi-Fi password to could end up being a carrier of the malware. When they visit your house, the attackers could then run an automated script that executes the exploit in order to get your router's credentials, and they could even turn on that remote administration feature. Now, the reason I say semi-persistent access is because the malicious code itself usually only runs in RAM, which gets cleared when you reboot your device. The same concept applies to a lot of smartphone malware, which is the reason why the NSA has given people the advice to reboot their routers so the malware gets wiped out. But that might not be the solution to all of your problems, because the main goal is not just to install a backdoor, it's to make changes to how the router functions that would end up persisting after a reboot. You see, by changing the DHCP settings on the router, the hackers are able to hijack the DNS traffic of all of the devices that are running on the network. And the reason that DNS hijacking is such a nasty trick is because the attacker doesn't need to hack every single laptop, phone, smart TV, and game console on your network one by one. They can just poison the DHCP service that tells those devices where the website's live, so the downstream devices automatically inherit the attacker-controlled DNS resolvers. For specific targets, they can then return fraudulent DNS answers that can set up man-in-the-middle attacks to steal passwords, tokens, emails, and your browsing data. So how do you protect yourself? First, log into your router and actually audit it. You want to check the firmware version, verify it is still getting updates, and ensure remote management is disabled. You also want to check what DNS servers are configured under the WAN or DHCP settings. And you should change the administrator password immediately if it's weak, reused, or still set to the default. The feds recommend replacing older devices, but that can cost $100 or more. Plus, the FCC is banning new foreign-made consumer routers, leaving very few domestic options besides Starlink. Luckily, there is another solution. If your old router has good coverage but no updates, you might be able to install open-source firmware like DWRT or OpenWrt to breathe new life into it. Or, if you have an older desktop PC, you can set up a DIY router with pfSense. You'll get a much more powerful router firewall than anything you'd buy at a store, and you'll learn a ton about network security. The main thing is to keep your network equipment up to date, and never ignore bad certificate warnings in your browser. If you enjoyed this video, like and share it, and check out my online store base.win for merch. Have a great day.